pro.
Welcome to beautiful California, where the sun is always shining and it's always warm. Unless you live in the Bay Area, in which case, there's a lot of fog. But in all honesty, this is really great lighting for me today, so it's working out.
Hello. Welcome to the Leopard Lodge. I'm Liv, and if you're new here, this is a channel dedicated to creative projects in the home.
Or slightly outside the home. So we're in the backyard today, but we are making something for inside and have these lovely plastic lawn chairs that came with the place. And I would really like to replace them at some point, so please subscribe. Please. Today we are making moss poles for our climbing aerial rooted plants like monsteras, philodendrons, other things that climb. They're seeking moisture, they're climbing up to the sun. That's what they do. So moss pole kind of recreates that situation for them, and then you get like a way happier, less floppy plant. You know what I'm talking about, floppy plants. You want a fun, happy, upright plant. Although I do like to let my philodendrons hang, but sometimes it's fun to let them climb. Plant stuff, it's fun. For this project, what you're gonna need is a PVC pipe. This is a 1-inch diameter pipe. It is 10 feet. I'm gonna make 3 moss poles, one that's 4 feet and 2 that are 3 feet. Keep in mind that part of the pole is going to be in the soil, so there's not actually gonna be like 4 feet sticking out. But if you have a really big monstera, you might actually want a 4-foot pole. Depends on what you're working with. I don't know. End caps, they go on like that. I picked up 3 because I'm making 3 moss poles. Sphagnum moss, long, fibrous material that absorbs a lot of water. You can also get it at the pet store. A lot of people use it for terrariums. Not peat moss. Don't buy peat moss. Hardware cloth. They sell a roll of this for like $7 at the hardware store. I found out later that a lot of hardware stores sell it by the foot so that you don't have so much of this left. And of course, I can't just have my moss pole be green because boring. So I'm gonna be painting it gold. Pea pebbles. I also bought some U-shaped gold bobby pins. I sourced these specifically for this project because I'm a little bit much sometimes. But you can just get regular bobby pins. The U-shaped ones is what you want though. You'll see why. And I got some brassy gold craft wire. And that's about all we're gonna need. We want to figure out how much of our pole is going to be in the soil versus how much is going to be on top. Before you cut your pole, I had to cut my pole first. I couldn't bring a 10-foot pole in here. I don't know if it really needs to be completely at the bottom and think that there's going to be a cap on here as well. So I'm just trying to measure basically from here to here how much space that is. 8.5 inches. My pole is 3 feet. So 2 feet and 3.5 inches will be sticking out. Math is hard.
Get started by cutting the PVC pipe into your calculated measurements. I used a pipe cutter to help me score the pipe and get an initial cut, but if you don't have a pipe cutter, just skip this and move on to the cutting.
And then I'm just going in with my hacksaw.
Using a handsaw, carefully saw your pipe where needed. I learned after the fact you could also use a utility knife for this, and that might be a little bit easier / make less of a mess, but I learned this information too late, but I'm passing it along to you.
So anyway, if you're a dum-dum like me and bought 2-foot hardware cloth, but you actually need to cover more than 2 feet, you should really calculate these things before you buy your supplies. Luckily, I found this on the street, and I have no idea what I'm gonna do with all of it, but it's definitely going to leave me with the measurements that I need for my poles.
You'll want to leave enough room around the PVC pipe for the moss to sit between that and the hardware cloth.
And we don't want to be able to see the pole.
My hardware cloth wound up being 7 inches wide. You can cut the hardware cloth with wire cutters or aviation snips. You'll want your length measurement to be as long as the part of the pipe that won't be in the soil, plus 1 inch to make sure that you can't see the top of the pipe. So my pole was 3 feet long, exposing 2 feet and 4 inches. The amount of hardware cloth I cut was 2 feet and 5 inches. I definitely recommend wearing gloves during this process. The tools can be kind of hard on your hand, and the hardware cloth itself is quite sharp. I definitely walked away with some battle wounds. You don't have to paint your hardware cloth, but I thought it would be more fun and aesthetic to have a brass moss pole. You could also use other colors. I just love everything to be brass and vintage looking. It's a problem. I have a problem. I know this about myself. It's exhausting. While your hardware cloth dries, you can get started on making your drainage holes. I sort of just eyeballed it. I used a 532 drill bit. I did a row on each side of the pole, 4 rows in total, and staggered the holes so there would be variance in drainage. I was concerned that my pipe might show through the moss in some areas, so I decided to paint the pipe a kind of mossy sage green. I don't think that this was actually necessary because the moss layer is quite thick, but if it makes you feel better like it made me feel better, just go ahead and do it. Otherwise, you can skip this step.
We have our hardware cloth. It's painted brass. I have my PVC pipe painted green.
After everything is dry and you're ready to start assembling, you want to make sure that you soak your moss for about 5 minutes. Wring out the water, then lay out your hardware cloth, grab some moss, and start laying it down in flat sections across the hardware cloth.
I feel like you want to go a little overboard with this, more than you think, because you can always take it out, and you can actually add it in too.
Once your hardware cloth is covered in a thick layer of moss, place the PVC pipe on top, and starting at one end, begin to close the hardware cloth.
I want to make sure that that hole is still accessible.
Taking strands of craft wire in approximately 1 foot segments so it's easy to work with, fasten it to one end of the hardware cloth. Then begin lacing it back and forth between each side, pulling taut after each loop. When you come to the end of one segment, tie it off and start again until you reach the bottom, adding additional moss where needed.
Slip it through both things. Grab some pliers. Grab the edge of one. Just give it a quick wrap. And that is pretty secure.
Gonna take our cap, put on the bottom.
It's really heavy. We're only gonna fill this up to about here with pebbles. You get the idea. We are going to put our finished moss pole in the plant. I don't want to get my hands dirty, but you can do this without gloves if you want. I'm going to unpot my plant because it's still pretty young. It's not gonna be too traumatic for it. I am gonna put it in the water while we work on the soil. When you're unpotting a plant, you want to do it really carefully. You don't want to disturb the roots too much. It can be really stressful for the plant. So I'm just kind of really carefully reaching in, figuring out where the roots are.
I unpotted my plant very carefully, being sure to leave as many roots intact as possible, and left the plant in some water while I worked.
I have a bucket to put my soil in, add some pebbles to the bottom of the pot. Monsteras really like good drainage, even though they also really like water. So I'm gonna put a little bit of soil back in here.
I placed the pole in the pot where I wanted it to sit.
So if I have it fairly central, that gives the plant the opportunity to kind of grow around it on all sides. Or if I have it in the back, that gives it the opportunity to have a lot of front-facing things. If you want it to be more of a presentation, I think I'm gonna go for it slightly back. I'm making sure that the pole is all the way down at the bottom.
Then I placed the plant where I wanted that to sit near the pole.
Now I'm paying attention to where my nodes are because you want the nodes to latch on to the moss. That's the whole point.
A node, for those of you who don't know, is a future aerial root.
It's important to make sure that the soil is really packed tightly around the pole so that it stays stable. More soil in here. You always want to kind of overfill your pot more than you think because when you water, the soil kind of sinks down, so better to have more than not enough. I don't think I mentioned this before, but you want to take your kind of sewn up side that's a little bit less cute and make sure that it's going to be wherever your wall is or facing away. So the plant needs a little bit of help getting used to climbing up this tree. So we're just going to give it a little encouragement by kind of adhering it to the pole.
To help train the plant, I secured it with a bobby pin.
So I'm finding my little node. That's my biggest node, so that's the one that I'm most concerned about. And then I'm taking my bobby pin and pushing it into the pole. This is also a great way to train your plant to sit how you would like it. So if you have a leaf facing like over here, say, you could kind of train it to go more like that if you wanted. You do want to leave it some space to grow, so don't put it too tight. Repotting your plants is a great time to fertilize them. So I have some indoor plant food. The directions say 1 pump per gallon of soil. I have my leftover water from when I was holding the plants in here, and we're just gonna give it 2 little pumps. And I'm gonna water this moss pole.
I added some pebbles on top for extra security and weight.
So the great thing about having that tube in here is that you pour water in and it should disperse water throughout and into the soil as well. And this is how you want to water this every time, guiding it inside but also around to make sure that moss stays wet.
So let's look at how all these moss bowls turned out. I won't bore you with the messy details of how I calculated how much I spent on each pole, but when all was said and done, it was about $10.50 per pole. I will link the items I used or similar items in the description below. I hope y'all enjoyed this little plant video. I'm not a plant expert, but I do love plants and have too many of them, and also not enough of them. Don't tell Tom. So if you want to see more plant content, let me know in the comments below. Try to give some new updates on how my plants' health are doing in my Instagram, so make sure that you're following me there. See you all next time at the Leopard Lodge.